Hey everyone, welcome to Locked In, the channel that brings the best college football intel to the modern fan. We appreciate all of you who've watched our channel and would love for you to become part of the channel by clicking the subscribe button. This will help us become more visible on YouTube and help us achieve our goal of raising football IQs everywhere through in-depth analysis in plain English. Thanks everyone. Stay locked in. Hey everyone, big news today in the college football world. Maybe bigger than anything we've heard in quite a while. Everybody speculated for the past few years about when this day would come. And behold, January 10, 2024, late afternoon, we get word that the great Nick Saban, head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, is going to call it a career and retire. Um, no questions asked. This man's left a legacy like, very few others could ever put a claim to. And he's no doubt going to leave a massive vacancy at Alabama and in college football and honestly in football as a whole. Uh, you can say that about a lot of people, and we do when a lot of greats retire. But with Saban, it's really quite different. And honestly, maybe the best thing about him is that the numbers completely back up any wild claim you could make. And so before we go any further, let's just consider some of the stats that Nick Saban has compiled in his career as a head coach in general, and especially at the University of Alabama.
So if we want to talk about Saban's career record as a college head coach, he has 292 wins, 71 losses, and one tie. That is his entire college coaching career. Just at Alabama, it was 206 wins and 29 losses. And including with Alabama here, Nick Saban has produced 44 first round draft picks, and he only has 29 losses at the one school. Alabama Crimson Tide, and that obviously that number is going to grow going into this next year, where I'm sure we'll have at least one more going to the first round. So that number is obviously insane. He's won 6 national titles at Alabama. He won his first at LSU, and he has 11 SEC championships, 4 Heisman Trophy winners at Alabama. I think he's the only coach to produce Heisman Trophy winners there, which is pretty insane considering coaches in the past. He was there for 17 seasons. He won the SEC more times than he did not while coaching at Alabama, and of course, then he had some very good records at other schools as well. He was at Toledo, Michigan State, and he was 9-2 at Toledo in 1990, 6-5, 6-6, 7-5, 6-6, and 9-2 Michigan State. It's 5 years there. So that was an overall record of 34, 24-1. There was a tie there. Then LSU 8-4, 10-3, 8-5, 13-1 when they won the national championship, and then 9-3, 5 years at LSU. Then he went to the NFL for a few years, and then he started his tenure at Alabama. First year, obviously very rocky. Everybody uh, probably knows that. Went 2-6, and then after that, there wasn't a single season with more than 4 losses. He had 3 losses was the most he ever had after his first season in Alabama. It was in 2010. He went 10-3. Every other season was either a 0 in the loss column, a 2, or a 1. So just an absolutely insane record. I believe he has the highest winning percentage in all of college football. As far as obviously there's a qualifier there for coaching or head coaching games that you've had, but he is number one in that category. He is in the top. He's in the top list for overall wins. He is not the number one, but he is still very, very high on that list as well. So just an unbelievable amount of. There's even more. I mean, he has so many records. He has been a coach of 2 teams that have gone undefeated the entire season to win the national championship. There have been, I believe, 12 of those teams. That number might be a little bit incorrect, but it's somewhere around 12 of those teams who have been able to do that and win the national title. He was coach of 2 of those. So just an unreal resume from what is widely considered, and rightfully so, the greatest college football coach of all time.
That's an impressive career. I mean, I would say stat line, but that's just an impressive career. And he's been at it for a long time. He's done it everywhere. You read biographies of Saban, he's got an interest in life. He's son of a prominent coach in West Virginia, coached, in a lot of, Pop Warner football and was just known as a legend. and he carried it on, carried on the old man's tradition. And I think that, really it's interesting just to see his life in terms of football. And the thing that I know as I get older, I'll turn 42 this year, so I guess I've got maybe another 20 years or so left in me. But one of the things that always stands out to me as I get older is whenever you see these greats leave the game, and whenever you see moments happen that you're like, you're never going to see that again. I remember just one more recently that stood out to me was I remember when New England won one of the last Super Bowls, and I'd followed them for several years and kind of grew up with them, and that one's coming, and you think I never thought they'd get this one, and they probably won't ever get another one, and you know what? Looks like it's going to be a long time. Well, it's kind of the same thing with Nick Saban. I mean, Nick Saban's been, I guess a part of my football life for a long time, albeit, from a distance. And I always knew Toledo was good. I remember as a kid, keeping up, with the scores and reading, the old Athlon, annuals every year that would come out in July. But I never really knew much about them. And then all of a sudden, I found out why they were so doggone good. And that's when Nick Saban wound up at Michigan State. And, now as then Michigan State, they have a year every now and again, but they're not exactly what you call a powerhouse, never have been. Doesn't seem like they're going to be. But one day in particular stands out to me because I've always through my life, it's kind of an odd thing. I've always kept up with Ohio State football. And I've been a bigger fan, at different times, and so, I guess a lesser fan at other times. But the one game that's impressed on me, throughout is that 1998 game that in which Michigan State wound up upsetting them. And honestly, to me, that was the beginning of who Saban would become. Um, there's honestly no reason why that Michigan State should have won that game. I mean, they were, I think at the time, Michigan State was, 4-5, I believe they were. It was a late season game, maybe late October, and nobody expected them to win. Ohio State had been ranked number one all year. They had a fairly loaded team and were expected to, make the BCS national championship game, but that wasn't to be. That game really was the first time that the concept of the process that we hear so much about with Nick Saban really came to full life. And there's a whole history, it's grounded in a lot of academic research and psychology, and, and various people that were attached to the Michigan State program and that stayed with Saban on, beyond that. But the idea of it was that Saban became convinced and convinced Michigan State that even though they weren't very good, that they could beat Ohio State by changing their approach. And so what their approach was, they were not going into the game thinking about winning or losing. The outcome didn't matter, not the outcome of the game. So what he says about it, he said, we were just going to focus on the process of what it took to play the best football you could play, which was to focus on that particular play as if it had a history and life of its own. And we have heard for years from coaches, from players, whoever it may be, wherever you're from, they always say, play every play like it's your last. Focus on this play, forget the last play. That's a lot easier said than done. But on that night in 1998, they did it. They seriously did it. They focused on the outcome of each play and not the outcome of the game. And by the time it was said and done, and it was sealed, they almost lost it, and it was sealed with a big interception on the goal line that let the Spartans beat the Buckeyes, who should have never been beaten, should have been undefeated national champions that year, honestly, but they lost to Michigan State. So I remember it was the next week. It was the last game of our high school season, and we were playing a pretty tough opponent that we honestly didn't have any chance of competing with, and we didn't compete with them. But I remember before the game in our position group walkthrough, the our line coach saying, hey, like, you just got to be like Michigan State. It's like, you just got to believe you can win. And of course, I'm standing there knowing that we're fixing to catch it in the teeth, and that it probably was more complicated than just believing you could win. And what's interesting is to see, like, how this process, as it's called, is unfolded honestly, over the decades, was like what I thought, as a 16-year-old kid, much more complex than simply believing you could win. It was a whole new philosophy on football. And I think that if Saban can be credited for doing anything, he has really introduced that approach. I don't think you can watch a football game anymore without seeing some touch of Nick Saban on it. Whether it's defensive strategies, whether it's the management, of a staff, whatever it may be, Nick Saban's imprint is on this game in a way that I don't think is ever going to go away. And so now, like, I mean, whenever I sit here and think about, his his career being over, and I think he's done for good. I mean, I really do. I don't think it's going to be, a wavering back and forth. I mean, to me, it's just amazing that we're here talking about an era that's ended. And I don't think it's a surprise that it ends now because we're in an age where college football really has, I think, gone silly in a lot of ways. And I have no doubt that a coach like Nick Saban doesn't want to live in a world where you have, all kinds of squabbles over NIL deals. You have people, even, on teams that went through the playoff, even, that will probably be, looking to transfer someplace because, hey, why not? Uh, you probably don't want to be in a situation where every year it feels like that you have to re-recruit your own players. I can see a lot of reasons why that he likely wants to get out of the game at this time. And for me, the thing that I'm really glad of that he is doing, even though it didn't end in a national championship, that would have been, the perfect write-off. But that was becoming, I think, increasingly difficult. I'm glad that he went out on top. I'm glad that we are not talking about this after seeing, Alabama lose 4, 5, 6 games and everybody say, well, man, Saban just don't have it anymore. I'm glad that he's not going out in the same manner that say, like, not to, I guess, be disrespectful, but Phil Fulmer at Tennessee. I'm glad that that's not the end for him after he's accomplished so much. And so this is pretty much my send off for Nick Saban. I mean, everything the man has done, I've admired. I mean, I'm like I think a lot of people could say, I've never called myself, an out and out Alabama fan, but I've always been a Nick Saban fan. I've respected what he's done. I've respected what he's meant to the game, and I've learned a lot from watching the things that he's done. I've learned a lot about how to attack. Whether it's offensively or defensively. Everything that I think, even though I'm not much of a defensive coach, if I were, every single thing that I would do would have some basis somewhere in what Nick Saban's done. And I think that, so many coaches from his tree, so many players, that's played under him, they'd say the same thing. The man made an impact, and it's an impact, honestly, that we'll never forget. And that's where I'll leave it with Nick Saban. What a career!
Yeah, and that he will go down as the greatest coach of all time in college, and his coaching tree has expanded, and you'll see it live on forever, as long as college football is alive. Just being honest. But with that being said, we need to get into the ever hovering topic of conversation, which has been that way for about 7 years, just waiting on him to retire. Who is going to replace the GOAT, Nick Saban? And right now, there are 5 leading candidates. That being Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer, Dabo Sweeney, James Franklin, and Mike Norvell. Each come with their own little thing. I mean, you have to pay out to buy every coach. So you're not only going to have to pay them, but you're going to have to buy out their coaching contract for their team right now. Dan Lanning is at 20 million. Kalen DeBoer is at 12. Dabo's at 7.5. James Franklin is at 6, and Mike Norvell is at 4 million. So I mean, you got to pay a lot of money to have these coaches quit their team and come to yours if you're Alabama. But at Alabama, you have that money. You can decide, and you want the legacy of Nick Saban to live on. Speaking of legacy, Dan Lanning was a coach under Nick Saban, and one of Nick Saban's coaching tree branches, Kirby Smart. And Dabo Sweeney also went to college at Alabama and played college ball there, so he's a graduate from Alabama and alum. Then you have other notable names like Mike Norvell, James Franklin, and Kalen DeBoer that are just proven coaches that are very good at football and that you have seen through their years just be winners and be very good at football. So, I mean, some interesting potential candidates for the job. Would y'all like to give any input on that?
I mean, a couple thoughts there, like the buyout situation. As an FSU fan, like, you're really happy with what Norvell's been doing, but I can see not only Alabama being a great job, it's one of, if not the top job in college football to some degree because of what Saban has created. You can look at it a different way and say that it's a terrible job because whoever comes in there has to fill the shoes of the greatest football coach of all time, and that's fair enough. But when you're just looking at the program, obviously Alabama has been king, and despite not winning this year, overall in the last 15 years, they have been the kings of college football. So it's obviously a very appealing job. They have all the money in the world they want to, spend on whatever they want when it comes to a coach. They can buy out any of those contracts, so the money is not necessarily an issue for them. It's just who they want, who they think is the best fit, and then the coaches, whether they really want to go take that job or whether they don't. Uh, for Mike Norvell, call it whatever you want. I'm just going to say snub because I'm an FSU fan and I'm allowed to. With FSU being snubbed out of the playoff, two of the teams that jumped them into the playoff were Texas and Alabama. Alabama being the vacancy here, it'd be very easy to see a very great coach who has transformed a program back to where they used to be in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. He's got them back to being a winning program. But despite him going undefeated this season, he was told by all the powers that be that him and his team going undefeated were not enough to get in. Obviously, the college football playoff changes next year, but the point still stands that Alabama as a program was viewed at a much higher level than his program, despite him having more wins than Alabama did. So, just from that perspective, you can see how Mike Norvell says, okay, I want to go to the place that I know gives me the best shot to compete for a title. That's just from that side of it. Then there's also you got the connections that Dan Lanning has. The Caleb DeBoer and his rise to fame. All of a sudden, I think he's lost 3 games in 2 years. He obviously is playing for a national title this year. He's turned Washington into a powerhouse in his couple years there. So, he's obviously a very hot commodity at the moment. James Franklin, he is a winner. He wins 9, 10 games a year consistently, but he seems to never be able to get to 11 and 12, never get to be able to compete with the very best. His record against the top teams in the Big Ten against his rivals, I believe, is 2-20, 3-20. And I don't foresee Alabama pursuing that one heavily. Maybe I'm wrong, but that one does not feel like the guy that they would necessarily go after. And then who's my other one? Dabo. 4 years ago, that would have been a shoe-in. Dabo was the hottest coach in college football, other than Saban himself. They were playing each other 4 straight years in a row in the playoffs, and they split their national titles 2-2. So there's obviously a lot of history there. Dabo is an Alabama guy. He went to Alabama, if I do believe I'm correct about that. And he has a lot of history with them, at the very least, or he coached there. So I think that has been said before that the only place that Dabo would leave Clemson for would be Alabama. But now we're looking at Clemson in a little bit of a different light. The last 2 years, they have struggled compared to their relative great success over the last 10 years. The last 2 years have been a struggle for them. They still have done okay, but not to the standard that he set there at Clemson. And I don't know if uh, those struggles would be a detriment enough to keep him out of that job from the Alabama side. Saban and Dabo have agreed on the majority of things when it comes to the dislike of the climate and situation that college football finds itself in, especially with the transfer portal and just other things going on, NIL. The difference between the two of them is that Nick Saban understood that I don't like this, but I have to adapt to this in order to stay competitive against the top schools in the country. I am the coach of the top school in the country. There's a standard that we have set here, and if we don't jump on this, then we will be left behind. So Saban, despite not liking the climate of college football, adapted to the climate of college football, and it earned them another title. It earned them another chance at a title this year in the playoff. They didn't win, but it kept them competitive in the very top echelon of college football. And then you look at Clemson and a coach who also did not like the landscape of college football, but said, I'm going to do my best to not participate in this. I'm going to rally against this new era of college football. We'll participate in NIL, yeah, but I don't want to focus on that. I don't want to focus on transfer portal. I want to keep my focus on high school recruits only. and not buy into all of this stuff going on. And you can see that that has correlated to Clemson dropping out of the top tier teams over the last 2 years. So I don't know if that's enough to hurt him. Uh, some people think it is. I still think that he's obviously able to build a program and turn it into a very successful one. He took Clemson from middling to great, and they are still in the conversation for everything like in the ACC, and they still have a fantastic roster. But his view on the portal, I believe, is starting to change a little bit, but I don't know if it's changed enough. Where Alabama's, their hiring process, they look at that and they say his view on this is not he's not caught up enough for us to be able to hire him. So I'm not sure about that. So I think there's question marks and there's different things with each person. Dan Lanning to me seems to make the most sense from both sides, especially maybe more from his side. He's losing a lot of players this year.
Get relief.
And he's he's losing his quarterback, which obviously, Bo Nix leaving is a big deal. He's been a great quarterback for Oregon for the last 2 years. He was especially good this year. And they have a lot of talent that's leaving. So this would be a good time for him to jump. And obviously, Alabama is the premier program. And I think that his time at Georgia and his time before, a little before that at Alabama, he loves the SEC. He loves what you can do in the SEC. So it would make sense for him to go there. So I think all of them are interesting perspective or prospects. James Franklin would be the last one on my list out of that, just based on how I've seen these coaches operate and the teams that they've operated for as long as they have. So it's definitely really interesting. I think what people are also kind of missing, or the secondary discussion to this, is what happens to the teams that go all in on that Alabama goes all in on. So let's say Alabama chases Dan Lanning at Oregon, and they get him. So who does Oregon go after? And then whatever team that Oregon steals from, who does that team go after? So you're talking about a potential shuffle here of coaches again. Same thing like for FSU. FSU is arguably a blue blood program. They were later on in life as far as college football teams go, but they had the most success over 2 decades other than Alabama. Alabama actually matched them with their 15-year mark. So that is a big time program that would be looking for a head coach if Norvell were to go to Alabama. So where does FSU steal from? And then who does that team? So I think there's another question that is, or a potential question that starts rippling based off Alabama's decision on who they go after. I'm curious about who the next coach for Bama will be, but I'm also curious to see how this affects the rest of college football. Transfers in and out of Alabama. Obviously a lot of people, if they think they smell blood in the water, they're looking to try and steal a bunch of Alabama guys because Saban's not there. Rightfully so. I understand the mindset. I think a lot of those guys are going to be waiting to see who their coach is going to be before they make a decision on their portal life. But from a player perspective and a coaching perspective on who could go where because of the change of coaches here, it makes college football very interesting as we head into the offseason. I guess this was, there was already going to be a very interesting offseason, and this has just added a very large wrinkle into the landscape of college football that we already have a lot of wrinkles, and this may just now be the biggest one because we've just lost the biggest coach in college football history.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, I think there's going to be a ripple effect. I mean, there's going to be obviously big name coaches moving around because you move one, like you said, everybody else is looking for theirs. I think I'm with you on pretty well how you're looking at this. I mean, I cannot imagine James Franklin being the first choice, and simply for the reason you said, I've yet to see him really perform consistently against the top of the Big Ten, and most years the top of the Big Ten is not the top of the SEC. I just don't know that Mike Norvell is enough of a splash. I mean, then that's kind of, I think, the thing that I think with him.
Mm-hmm.
What's his experience, with the SEC? I think that's going to matter. Likewise, the same with DeBoer. Say what you want, Washington Huskies don't play defense, at least not the way that they do in the South. And they did. I mean, I thought they showed some real life in that national championship game in the second and third quarters playing defense. But for much of the year, defense clearly wasn't the focus. And I'm not sure you win at Alabama. by playing that style of football. Maybe you can, but he's a West Coast guy, and I think he's probably going to stay at Washington. I know I would if I had that situation out there. The thing with Dabo, and I think with James Franklin too. So Sweeney and Franklin, I just think their days passed.
Mhm.
That's not to say that they won't continue to win, but I don't think that they either one would be the kind of splash hire that would pull transfers and pull recruits. I don't think that's going to happen if that takes place. I think there will be it'd be kind of a ho hum thing if they win, because I think both of them are at that spot in their career. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. My money would be on Lanning. Uh, he has really done a fine job at Oregon. He did a heck of a job as a defensive coordinator at Georgia, and I know people will say, "Oh, well, that's Kirby's defense." Sure, it is, but as a head coach at a program the size of Georgia, you're going to have to turn a lot of things over to a defensive coordinator. And Lanning happened to be there whenever they had a bunch of rings on their hand. So I think that counts. He's proven, they know who he is. I would not be surprised if that's the first person that they call. And one thing too that I wanted to mention about with Sweeney, and you made mention of Clemson, him building Clemson up from a middling program to, something great. What would you call it? I guess that capital that he has built up at Clemson would not be there at Alabama. And I wonder, with his current, like kind of his current views and the performance of the team. I mean, they were in a dogfight with Kentucky, and that's no disrespect to either team, but they were in a dogfight with Kentucky in a bowl game. And that's not what you want to have people saying about you if you were looking for the Alabama job. I wonder if he would have a hard time dealing with the politics of Alabama football, because that is not a normal place. I mean, just listen to the call-ins on Paul Feinbaum, and you'll find that's an interesting place to coach. And I wonder how that Sweeney would be with that kind of atmosphere. So I think that I think that probably Lanning is your first choice, and we'll see where it goes from there.
I thought,
Chance, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll say a few honorable mentions that just don't get mentioned in this. Glenn Schumann, Georgia's DC, alma mater was Alabama. He could also go there. I don't think it'll be their first or second or even third option, but say one of them more prestigious coaches don't want to go to Alabama and want to keep holding on at Oregon or Washington or Florida State, wherever they may be. You can see Glenn Schumann go. And also another notable one that I don't think gets mentioned a lot, which is the NFL coach Mike Vrabel. Vrabel could come down into college. I could see him doing very well. He's an Ohio State guy. So, I mean, you could see him take over at Ohio State and then kick Ryan Day to the curb, and maybe Ryan Day comes to Alabama.
I was going to
I
mention
mean,
that.
I don't think it actually happens. I think it's Dan Lanning all the way, in my opinion as well. The sports books even has the odds for Dan Lanning to be hired first. So I mean, I think it's Dan Lanning. Everybody else thinks it's Dan Lanning. It's just whether Dan Lanning wants to go. I think the job is his, though.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different names that I don't think would go. I mean, obviously, you're talking about with Saban leaving, who's the next, the next in line to be the king of college football, and obviously Kirby Smart's the answer there. So there's a lot of people talking about, well, would they try? Kirby's not leaving Georgia. I think the only way Kirby Smart leaves the University of Georgia is if he gets offered the biggest contract in the NFL, and I still not even sure he's a Georgia guy through and through. Maybe if Atlanta Falcons hired him, but Georgia's fine. Kirby's not leaving there. At least I don't think so anyway. And then I saw Sarkisian. Obviously, he coached Alabama with Saban, had a lot of success at Alabama with Saban. I think Texas is one of maybe 5 schools that can match whatever number Alabama throws out to pay him to leave. If Texas wants to keep Sarkisian, which I think they do, I think that Texas can match whatever number Bama throws. So I don't think that he'd be leaving. And also, Sarkisian has kind of set himself up at Texas, where he's got a good quarterback room with a lot of hype around it, and he's got a lot of expectations there that I think himself has to see that program. They obviously made the college football playoff, but they lost. So I think there's still some time and room for him to do even bigger things at Texas. I think he wants to do those things. And then And then the Ryan Day thing that you mentioned, I've seen people talk about that. How there's been a lot of buzz about maybe him being fired because of the losses against Michigan 3 years in a row, the losses against all the SEC schools anytime he plays them recently, yada yada yada. The man's lost like 10 games in 6 years at Ohio State or 5 years at Ohio State. He's done an incredible job there. But the idea was they kick him out, like you said, hire Vrabel, and then Ryan Day could go to Alabama. I don't know how feasible that is. I don't think that's happening. So
What?
I'm not sure. I look at some of these other programs. I like Locke was talking about, like splash hires. Like Norvell is not quite the splash yet. I think if you see if FSU win another good, like if they have another 11, 12, 13 win season next year,
Yeah.
then maybe you're looking at that. Because obviously this year Norvell's team was great as far as like their talent level and also their maturity. We had a ton of juniors and seniors on that team, so a lot of leadership there. So then the question will be, okay, can Norvell have that same success when Jordan Travis is no longer his quarterback, and can he have that same success when all these guys are now going to the NFL? So next year will be the answer for that. But right now, I agree. I think he's a fantastic coach, but he's not the necessarily splash that people maybe will want to see there. So there's not a lot of names that would be a big splash for Alabama to take, and like the coordinators in house, I don't know. I don't know about that. I think Saban, he has earned his ability to probably give this administration in Alabama and the people who are looking for their next coach. He's probably earned the right to give his recommendation if he has one. I don't know if he does. I know there are some coaches who do that when they leave and retire, and there are other coaches who they don't want to have any part of who their replacement's going to be. So if he has any say, or if he has had any say, then I think that's obviously an interesting wrinkle into this. I know something that was reported on that's just pretty cool and speaks to Saban. A couple days after the loss in the semifinal, he was in his office working, and apparently today he was on an SEC head coach's call and he was interviewing coaches for open staff positions for Alabama before he announced his retirement. So he's obviously working. He was working on the day of his retirement for the program, which is speaks to his character and his respect for the game and his respect for the program that he's in. Some coaches, when they're on their way out, they get pretty lackluster and basically say, I don't care about any of this. Screw all of you. I'm out. Jimmy Fisher. So Nick Saban is doing it the right way. And if he has any more say on who should be their head coach, then, they go with whatever way he's leaning, but I don't know if we'll ever hear about that.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'll say one thing about Mike Norvell. I still think Mike Norvell's on the climb up. I think what you said about him is spot on. I think he's on the climb up, and we'll see in the next few years if he becomes one of these major candidates. I think he's got every opportunity to. Last thing I want to say, boys, I hope Nick Saban does have a say in his replacement, and I hope he finds it in his heart to go tell them they need to get on the phone and hire Joey Freshwater, Lane Kiffin to Alabama. That would be fun.
Well, I personally hope it's Bill O'Brien. And with that being said, for all you out there, Alabama fans alike, we're very sorry for your loss. And for the college football supporters and lovers out there, this is a great loss today, and we should celebrate Nick Saban and his career. For that, this is the Locked In crew. Stay locked in.
Everyone here at Locked In wants to say thank you to all of you who have subscribed to, liked, and commented on our channel. We've got a blast bringing great college football analysis to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. If you want to share your thoughts, we'd love to see your comments. Till next time, stay locked in.